Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. Jack Abbott didn't raise his voice when he did it, didn't need theatrics or threats or even anger, because the power of what he was about to unleash spoke louder than any scream ever could, and in that quiet, suffocating moment inside the Newman living room, where Victor Newman had always ruled like an untouchable king, Jack detonated a truth so catastrophic it rewrote decades of history in one brutal breath. As he calmly slid the DNA results across the table and said the words that shattered the Newman dynasty forever. Victoria Newman is not Victor's biological daughter, and Nikki knew, Nikki always knew, and she hid it, buried it, lived with it, loved Victor with it, lied to him with it, and let him build an empire, a legacy, a bloodline on a foundation of deception so unthinkable that even Victor Newman, a man who had survived wars, betrayals, prison cells, and the destruction of his enemies, went utterly still as his world collapsed in real time. The paper trembled in Victor's hands as he stared at the results, his eyes scanning the black and white certainty of science that could not be bargained with, threatened, bought, or destroyed, and for the first time in his life, Victor Newman had no words, no rage, no counterattack, only disbelief, as Nikki stood frozen, her face drained of color, her silence screaming louder than any confession ever could. Jack didn't gloat, didn't smile, didn't savor the devastation, because even he understood the magnitude of what he'd just done, but he also knew the truth had been weaponized against him and his family for years, and now it was time for the Newmans to bleed from a wound they never saw coming. Nikki finally whispered Victor's name, her voice breaking as decades of lies crashed down on her, but Victor didn't look at her, not at first, because if he did, he might lose the fragile control keeping him from exploding. And when he finally turned, the betrayal in his eyes was worse than fury, worse than hatred, because it was grief, raw and unfiltered, the grief of a man realizing the daughter he had adored, protected, fought for, and molded as his heir was never truly his by blood, and the woman he trusted above all others had stolen that truth from him every single day of their lives together. Jack spoke then, not cruelly but relentlessly, laying out the evidence, the testing, the confirmation, the chain of proof that left no room for denial, explaining that this wasn't rumor or revenge but fact, undeniable and final, and as each word landed, Victor's sense of identity fractured further, because everything he believed about his family, his lineage, his immortality through his children, was suddenly suspect. Nikki broke down, confessing through sobs that she had been terrified, that she loved Victor, that she didn't want to lose him, that she believed blood didn't matter because Victor was Victoria's father in every way that counted, but those words fell flat in the face of the ultimate sin for a man like Victor Newman, taking away his choice, his agency, his truth, and Victor finally erupted, his voice shaking the walls as he demanded to know who Victoria's real father was, a question Nikki had dreaded for a lifetime, a question that once spoken could never be taken back. Jack watched silently as Nikki hesitated, and that hesitation alone confirmed the worst fears Victor had never allowed himself to imagine, because this wasn't a mistake, this wasn't confusion, this was calculated silence, years of deception wrapped in love and fear and selfishness, and when Nikki finally spoke the name, it landed like a gunshot, echoing through every memory Victor had ever shared with his daughter. Victoria, unaware at first, arrived moments later, walking into a room thick with devastation, sensing instantly that something was wrong, her eyes darting between her parents, then landing on Jack, whose presence alone signaled catastrophe, and when Victor told her the truth, when he said the words out loud, voice cracking despite every effort to remain strong, Victoria's world imploded just as violently as his had, because the ground beneath her identity crumbled, her past rewritten, her future suddenly uncertain. She looked to Nikki for reassurance, for denial, for salvation, but Nikki's tears told the story no one wanted to hear, and Victoria staggered under the weight of it, struggling to reconcile the father who raised her with the stranger whose blood now defined her, and the mother she had trusted with her life with the woman who had manipulated her reality from the moment she was born. Jack stood back, knowing this wasn't about him anymore, knowing that vengeance had given way to tragedy, but he also knew that the truth had been hidden to protect power, to preserve the Newman image, and that kind of lie deserved exposure no matter the cost. Victor, torn between rage and love, made it clear that biology didn't erase years of fatherhood, but the fracture had already formed, invisible yet irreversible, because trust once broken at that level never fully heals, and Nikki realized too late that her silence hadn't protected her family, it had doomed it. The revelation rippled outward, threatening to destabilize Newman Enterprises itself, as questions arose about succession, legacy, and control, and enemies circled like vultures sensing blood in the water, while Victor struggled privately with the haunting realization that the one thing he valued above all else, his bloodline, had been compromised by the woman he loved most. Jack's DNA bomb didn't just expose a secret, it detonated decades of lies, forcing every Newman to confront uncomfortable truths about identity, loyalty, and the devastating price of deception. And as Victor stared out the window that night, alone with the weight of betrayal pressing down on him, one thing was painfully clear: Nikki's secret hadn't just rewritten Victoria's past, it had permanently altered the future of the Newman dynasty, leaving scars that no amount of power, money, or vengeance could ever fully erase. The fallout didn't stop with the shattering silence in the Newman living room, it spread like wildfire through every corridor of power Victor Newman had ever built, because once the truth existed, it refused to stay contained, and Victor learned quickly that betrayal doesn't end with revelation, it multiplies, festers, and poisons everything it touches. In the hours after Jack's DNA bomb detonated, Victor locked himself away in his study, the door closed, the lights dim, staring at old photographs of Victoria as a child, her first steps, her first day of school, the pride in his eyes when he lifted her onto his shoulders, each memory now twisted by a single, unbearable question: was any of it real, or had he been living someone else's life all along? Nikki hovered outside that door, terrified to knock, knowing that the man inside was no longer the husband who once forgave her everything, but a wounded titan grappling with the one lie he could never forgive. And when he finally emerged, his expression was carved from stone, his voice eerily calm. It was far more frightening than any explosive rage, because Victor Newman in control was dangerous, but Victor Newman hollowed out by betrayal was lethal. He told Nikki they would talk later, that he needed time. But his eyes told her the truth she feared most: time wouldn't soften this wound, it would only deepen it. Meanwhile, Victoria fled to her office at Newman Enterprises, desperate for something familiar to cling to, but even the boardroom felt hostile, every reflection in the glass reminding her that the name she bore, the empire she helped run, the legacy she was expected to protect, were all suddenly in question. And as whispers began circulating, because secrets like this never stay secret, Victoria realized she was no longer just a Newman by reputation but a symbol of scandal, a living reminder of Nikki's betrayal and Victor's humiliation. Nick and Adam were blindsided next, summoned by Victor under the pretense of an urgent family meeting, only to walk straight into the emotional wreckage left behind. And when Victor delivered the truth, Nick reacted with shock and disbelief, struggling to understand how the mother he adored could carry such a secret for so long, while Adam, ever the outsider, processed it with a cold, calculating silence that made it clear he already saw the implications, because if Victoria wasn't Victor's biological daughter, then the hierarchy of the Newman legacy had shifted in ways no one had prepared for, and power, once destabilized, always invites war. Nikki tried to explain herself to her sons, her voice breaking as she insisted she acted out of love, fear, and desperation, but Adam's piercing stare made it clear he wasn't buying it, because to him, lies were weapons, and Nikki had wielded hers masterfully for decades, and now the cost was being paid by everyone. Jack Abbott watched from a distance as the Newmans imploded, aware that his actions had crossed a line from corporate rivalry into irreversible personal devastation, yet he couldn't deny the bitter sense of justice pulsing beneath his guilt, because Nikki's deception had protected Victor while destroying Jack's family again and again, and now the truth had finally balanced the scales, even if it left nothing but ashes behind. Victor wasted no time turning his pain into action, launching a ruthless internal audit at Newman Enterprises, questioning every decision, every appointment, every assumption about loyalty, as if betrayal had become contagious. And when he began subtly sidelining Victoria from key decisions, not overtly, not cruelly, but unmistakably, the message was clear: trust had been damaged, and even love couldn't fully repair it. Victoria confronted him, her voice shaking as she demanded to know if he still saw her as his daughter, and Victor, torn between honesty and compassion, told her the truth as only he could, that biology didn't erase the years they shared, but it changed the way he saw everything, including himself, and those words cut deeper than any rejection ever could. Nikki watched the distance grow between them, realizing too late that the family she thought she was protecting was unraveling faster than she could hold it together, and when she finally confronted Jack privately, unleashing her rage, accusing him of cruelty and vengeance, Jack didn't back down, reminding her that she chose silence every day, that she chose deception over truth, and that no one forced her to let Victor live a lie for decades. As Genoa City buzzed with speculation, enemies like Tucker, Phyllis, and even distant corporate rivals sensed weakness, circling the Newmans with renewed interest, while Victor's paranoia intensified, his need for control clashing violently with his emotional devastation, and when he quietly ordered a second DNA test, this time without Nikki's knowledge, it became painfully clear that part of him still hoped the truth could be undone, that science might grant him mercy, but when the results came back identical to Jack's, the finality crushed whatever denial he had left. Nikki fell apart completely when Victor confronted her with the confirmation, collapsing into sobs as she begged for forgiveness, insisting she never stopped loving him, never meant to steal his life from him, but Victor's response was devastating in its restraint, as he told her love without truth was manipulation, and that the greatest cruelty wasn't the lie itself, but the years she denied him the choice to decide his own reality. Victoria, caught between parents she loved, spiraled into a quiet identity crisis, questioning whether she belonged anywhere at all, whether her authority, her achievements, her confidence had been built on borrowed ground, and when she tracked down her biological father, driven by a need for answers she never asked for, the encounter left her more broken than before, because blood alone couldn't replace the man who raised her, yet knowing the truth made pretending impossible. Adam, sensing opportunity, began positioning himself more aggressively within Newman Enterprises, exploiting Victor's fractured trust and Victoria's shaken confidence, while Nick tried desperately to hold the family together, acting as mediator, peacekeeper, and emotional shield, but even he realized that some fractures don't heal, they redefine the structure entirely. Jack, confronted by Kyle's conflicted reaction, pride mixed with horror, began to question whether winning was worth the devastation he'd caused. Yet the damage was done, and in Genoa City, truth once exposed can never be buried again. Victor eventually made a public statement, vague yet firm, asserting his continued leadership and dismissing rumors, but behind closed doors, the Newman marriage crumbled, as Victor moved out of the bedroom they once shared, drawing a line Nikki couldn't cross, and when she realized reconciliation might be impossible, the weight of her choices finally crushed her, leaving her alone with the echoes of a lie she thought was love. The DNA bomb Jack dropped didn't just rewrite one relationship, it reset the balance of power in Genoa City, turning allies into threats, family into factions, and love into collateral damage, and as Victor stood on the balcony of Newman Ranch one cold night, staring out at the land he built, he understood a truth more terrifying than betrayal itself. Empires can survive enemies, scandals, and even war, but when the foundation is built on a lie, everything above it eventually cracks, and the Newman dynasty would never be the same again. In the days that followed, the silence inside the Newman ranch grew louder than any shouting match ever could, because every footstep echoed with suspicion, every conversation felt like a performance, and Victor Newman moved through his own home like a stranger surveying conquered territory, aware that nothing he touched was untouched by Nikki's lie, and nothing he loved was immune to doubt. He stopped sleeping altogether, spending long nights in his study replaying conversations from decades ago, dissecting Nikki's words with surgical precision, wondering how many times she had almost told him the truth, how many times she had looked him in the eye and chosen deception instead, and the realization gnawed at him relentlessly, that the woman who claimed to love him most had decided she knew better than he did what truth he could handle. Nikki, meanwhile, unraveled completely, drifting through Genoa City with hollow eyes, haunted by memories of the moment she learned the truth herself, the panic that followed, the promises she made to herself that she would tell Victor one day, a day that never came, because comfort is seductive and fear is paralyzing, and now she was paying for every second of cowardice with the slow disintegration of her marriage and her family. Victoria tried to bury herself in work, pushing Newman Enterprises harder than ever, determined to prove, to Victor, to the board, to herself, that her worth wasn't dictated by DNA, but the pressure only magnified her internal crisis, because every success now felt tainted by the unspoken question lingering in every room, would she still be here if the truth had come out sooner? When a tense board meeting erupted into subtle power plays and whispered challenges to her authority, Victoria realized the truth had changed more than her personal life. It had turned her into a vulnerability others were eager to exploit. Adam, watching from the shadows, didn't miss a beat, quietly feeding Victor suggestions, ideas, strategic alternatives that conveniently positioned himself as the most loyal, most reliable Newman left standing, and though Victor hated himself for it, he found comfort in Adam's ruthless clarity, because pain had sharpened his instincts, and loyalty mattered more than ever. Nick confronted Adam over his obvious maneuvering, accusing him of using Victoria's pain as leverage, but Adam didn't deny it, coldly reminding Nick that power vacuums never stay empty, and if Victor didn't fill them himself, someone else would, and Adam had no intention of letting that someone be Victoria. Jack Abbott, increasingly isolated as the storm he unleashed continued to rage, found himself facing backlash from unexpected corners, including Tracy, and even Kyle, who questioned whether exposing the truth had crossed a moral line no rivalry justified, but Jack stood firm, arguing that lies of that magnitude rot everything they touch, and if Victor Newman had built an empire on deception, even unknowingly, then the reckoning was inevitable. Still, late at night, Jack wrestled with guilt, haunted by the image of Victoria's shattered face, knowing that justice and cruelty often wear the same mask. The scandal inevitably spilled into the press despite Victor's efforts to contain it, and though no outlet dared print the full truth, insinuations about paternity, legacy, and betrayal flooded the rumor mill, weakening Newman Enterprises' stock and emboldening rivals who had waited years for a crack in Victor's armor. Tucker launched an aggressive acquisition attempt, framing it as opportunistic expansion, but Victor recognized it for what it was, a vulture circling a wounded lion, and his response was swift and merciless, proving to Genoa City that betrayal might bruise him, but it wouldn't break him publicly, even if privately he was splintering apart. Nikki attempted one last, desperate bid for redemption, arranging a quiet dinner at the ranch, recreating a moment from early in their relationship, hoping nostalgia might soften Victor's heart, but the attempt backfired spectacularly when Victor accused her of manipulating memories the same way she manipulated truth, and when he finally said the words she feared most, that he didn't know if he would ever be able to forgive her, the finality in his voice crushed whatever hope she had left. Victoria, witnessing the collapse of her parents' marriage, felt consumed by guilt she couldn't justify but couldn't escape, and in a rare moment of vulnerability, she confronted Nikki, demanding to know why she hadn't trusted Victor enough to tell him the truth, and Nikki's answer, that she was afraid Victor would leave, only deepened the wound, because it forced Victoria to face the possibility that her existence had been shaped by fear, not love. Nick tried to rally the family, insisting that blood didn't define them, that Victor was still Victoria's father in every way that mattered, but even he sensed the truth slipping through his fingers, because trust, once broken, doesn't respond to logic, it responds to time, accountability, and sometimes never heals at all. Victor began quietly rewriting his will, restructuring trusts, and re-evaluating succession plans, moves that didn't go unnoticed by anyone paying attention, and when Victoria discovered she had been removed from a key contingency clause, the sting of it confirmed her worst fear, that no matter how much Victor loved her, something fundamental had shifted, and love alone wasn't enough to undo it. Jack was summoned to the ranch unexpectedly, and when he arrived, he braced himself for violence, vengeance, or at least fury, but Victor surprised him by thanking him, for the truth, for ending the lie, for forcing a reckoning Victor never asked for but now couldn't deny he needed, and that moment of uneasy respect between lifelong enemies underscored the tragedy of it all, because truth had done what decades of rivalry never could, it had leveled them both. Nikki, left alone in a house filled with memories she no longer belonged to, finally accepted that her silence had cost her everything she tried to protect, and as she packed her things, each photograph felt like an accusation, each empty room a verdict, and when she walked out of the ranch, she did so knowing that love built on lies eventually collapses under its own weight. Victoria stood at the center of the storm, no longer sure where she belonged, but slowly finding strength in the realization that her identity wasn't stolen, it was evolving, and though Victor's blood didn't run through her veins, his influence, his lessons, his resilience always would, even if their relationship would never be the same. As Genoa City adjusted to the new reality, alliances shifted, enemies sharpened their knives, and the Newman dynasty moved forward forever changed, because Jack's DNA bomb didn't just expose a secret, it shattered illusions, dismantled certainties, and forced every Newman to confront the most terrifying truth of all, that the past cannot be rewritten. And sometimes the greatest betrayals aren't committed in moments of hatred, but in years of silence. As the dust continued to settle, the emotional aftershocks refused to fade, because some betrayals don't end with apologies or departures, they linger, reshaping every interaction that follows. Victor threw himself into work with a ruthless intensity that left even his closest executives uneasy, using power as armor, strategy as distraction, and control as the only language he still trusted. Yet in rare unguarded moments, the pain surfaced in his eyes whenever Victoria entered the room, a reminder that love could survive truth, but innocence could not. Victoria, refusing to be defined by whispered doubts or revised bloodlines, made a bold decision to step out from under Victor's shadow, announcing a temporary leave from Newman Enterprises to pursue an independent venture, a move that shocked the board but forced Victor to confront a hard truth of his own, that the daughter he raised had inherited his strength not through DNA, but through years of shared battles, lessons, and belief. Nikki, now living alone, began the slow